What if your next big idea was hiding right inside your apartment? In 2007, two broke designers in San Francisco turned desperation into innovation, and that idea became one of the most disruptive travel companies on Earth. This is the story of how Airbnb started with air mattresses on a floor and transformed into a $100 billion global empire. But more than that, it's a story of grit, timing, rejection, and the belief that connection means more than comfort. Stay till the end, because the lesson these founders learned could change the way you look at your own dreams.
Chapter 1. The Rent Problem. San Francisco, 2007. Rents were skyrocketing. The economy was slowing, and two friends, Brian Keskey and Joe Gebbia, were struggling to pay theirs. They were both designers, fresh out of college, chasing creative dreams that didn't pay much. One evening, as Brian stared at their near-empty bank account, Joe looked around their apartment and noticed something simple: empty space. That same week, a major design conference was coming to the city. Hotels were fully booked. Joe turned to Brian and said, half-jokingly, "What if we just rent out our place to visitors?" That single question changed everything. They bought a few cheap air mattresses, made a basic website, and called it Air Bed and Breakfast. To their surprise, 3 guests showed up: a woman from Boston, a man from Utah, and a father visiting from India. The two friends served them breakfast, made a little cash, and shared stories late into the night. When the guests left, Brian and Joe looked at each other. This wasn't just a transaction. It was human connection. In that messy little apartment, an idea was born.
Chapter 2. The Struggle to Believe. But every great idea sounds crazy at first. When Brian and Joe told people about their plan, a website where you let strangers stay in your home, the reaction was instant. "That's insane!" Friends laughed. Investors said no. One even told them, "This will never scale. People don't trust strangers." But Brian and Joe weren't selling a bed. They were selling belonging. They believed people didn't just want a cheap place to crash. They wanted connection, authenticity, and trust. Soon, they convinced a third co-founder, Nathan Bletcherchick, a coder and data genius, to join them. Together, the trio built the first official version of Airbnb.com in 2008. The timing, however, couldn't have been worse. Just as they launched, the U.S. economy collapsed. People weren't thinking about vacations. They were thinking about survival. And the founders? They were just trying to stay alive, too. Chapter 3. The 2008 Crash. It was brutal. People were losing jobs, credit cards were maxed out, and investors wouldn't touch them. The Airbnb founders survived on cereal and instant noodles, working all night, coding all day. They had an idea, but no money, no traction, and no belief from the outside world. So, they did something absolutely wild. During the 2008 U.S. presidential election, Brian and Joe decided to design limited edition cereal boxes, one called Obama O's and another Cap'n McCain. They printed, glued, and packed the boxes themselves. Pure hustle. And somehow, it worked. They sold 800 boxes and raised $30,000, just enough to keep Airbnb's servers running. That quirky marketing stunt caught the attention of TechCrunch, which wrote about them. Suddenly, the same investors who had ignored them were calling back. Sometimes, survival takes creativity. Chapter 4. The Breakthrough. In 2009, Airbnb got accepted into Y Combinator, the startup accelerator that helped companies like Dropbox and Reddit. That's where they met Paul Graham, their mentor. After hearing about their struggles, Paul gave them one piece of advice that changed everything.
Go meet your users. It sounds simple, but it was revolutionary. The team flew to New York City, where most of their early hosts lived. They knocked on doors, helped hosts take better photos, improved listings, and listened to every single complaint. They realized that many hosts were offering great homes, but terrible photos. So Brian and Joe grabbed a camera, took professional pictures themselves, and re-uploaded the listings. Within weeks, bookings doubled. That's when they discovered Airbnb wasn't just about rooms, it was about trust. Trust built through photos, stories, and human connection. And this time, the world started to believe. Chapter 5. Growth Without Limits. From New York to London, from Paris to Tokyo, Airbnb started spreading like wildfire. Travelers loved the personal touch, hosts loved the extra income, and the media loved the idea of a company turning strangers into neighbors. By 2012, Airbnb hit 10 million nights booked. Traditional hotel chains laughed at first, calling it a fad. But deep down, they knew something had changed. People didn't just want fancy lobbies anymore. They wanted authenticity. They wanted stories, not room numbers. Airbnb wasn't selling stays. They were selling belonging. The platform became a symbol of the sharing economy, inspiring companies like Uber and Lyft. And for a while, everything seemed unstoppable. But every empire faces its storm. Chapter 6. Facing the Storm. Success brought new enemies and bigger problems. City governments started cracking down on short-term rentals. Hotel lobbyists pushed for bans. Headlines accused Airbnb of ruining neighborhoods. At one point, entire cities outlawed Airbnb listings overnight. The pressure was enormous. But instead of breaking down, Airbnb adapted. They rolled out host verification systems, insurance coverage, and 24/7 customer support. Each problem made them stronger. And then came 2020. When COVID hit, global travel collapsed. Airbnb's revenue fell 80% in just 1 week. In an emotional all-hands meeting, Brian Chesky told his team, "We're going to get through this, but it's going to be hard." They made the painful decision to lay off 25% of their staff. But even in crisis, they stayed true to their mission. They created relief funds for hosts who had lost their income. They didn't abandon their community. And that made all the difference. When travel reopened, Airbnb came back leaner, wiser, and stronger than ever. Sometimes survival isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning how to fly through it. Chapter 7. The Billion-Dollar Dream. In December 2020, Airbnb finally went public. It was one of the most anticipated IPOs in Silicon Valley history. Their valuation? Over $100 billion, higher than most hotel chains combined. Brian Chesky stood in front of the NASDAQ building, watching the Airbnb logo flash across giant screens. For a moment, he thought back to 2007, to that tiny apartment, the air mattresses, and the first guests who took a chance on them. He once said, "If we tried to think of a good idea, we wouldn't have been able to think of a good idea. You just have to find the solution to a real problem in your own life." From airbeds to billion-dollar IPO, it wasn't luck, it was persistence. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They started with what they had and believed when no one else did.
Lesson to learn from this case study. The Airbnb story isn't just about travel. It's about vision, courage, and the power of believing in something before the world does. It's a reminder that you don't need millions to start. You just need one small idea and the guts to follow it through.
because every empire begins with a single problem, and one person brave enough to solve it. So the next time you doubt your dream, remember, Airbnb didn't start in a boardroom. It started with air mattresses on a floor, two friends, and an impossible idea that made the world feel smaller and closer. And maybe, just maybe, your story is next.